Hello, Internet! The question of what art is has been debated for longer than anyone can comprehend, but to me, art at its core is human expression. Whether its purpose is to provoke an interpretive message, simply entertain whoever experiences it, or a mix of both. It could be a book, a painting, a song, a film, or maybe, just maybe, it could even be a game. Call it pretentious, call it confusing, call it derivative. I believe that Braid is an excellent work of art, like many other games that came before and after it. It challenged the preconceived notions of not only game design, but storytelling and even human society as a whole. So I'd like to take some time to make a thorough analysis of the game, as I feel it's one that isn't remembered as fondly as it deserves to be. Starting up the game greets you with this absolutely mesmerizing title screen. The background depicts a city on fire with a small silhouette on a bridge overlooking it all. Droning ambience plays over the scene with occasional intervals from various different string instruments. Moving to the right reveals the character we control to be a man with brown hair and a well-kept suit underneath the glow of two street lamps, and the constellation of Andromeda, with the stars strangely blacked out. In Greek mythology, Andromeda is a princess whose mother claims that she is fairer than the nymphs of the sea, angering Poseidon and causing him to send forth a sea monster known as Cetus. Andromeda is chained to a rock as a human sacrifice to appease the king of the sea before Perseus defeats the monster and saves her life. This story is the originator of the princess and dragon motif, which has been repeated in multiple fairy tales, films, and even video games, which is especially important in the context of Braid. Walking further to the right brings this man into a large house, the only illuminated room within containing shelves of what appear to be large electronic devices, and an empty frame with text that reads World 2 rather than World 1. Upon entering the door to this room, we're greeted with clouds everywhere, the title Time and Forgiveness, and a series of books on tables. Reading them, we get this. Tim is off on a search to rescue the princess. She has been snatched by a horrible and evil monster. This happened because Tim made a mistake. Not just one. He made many mistakes during the time they spent together, all those years ago. Memories of their relationship have become muddled, replaced wholesale, but one remains clear. The princess turning sharply away, her braid lashing at him with contempt. He knows she tried to be forgiving, but who can just shrug away a guilty lie, a stab in the back? Such a mistake will change a relationship irreversibly, even if we have learned from the mistake and would never repeat it. The princess's eyes grew narrower. She became more distant. Our world, with its rules of causality, has trained us to be miserly with forgiveness. By forgiving them too readily, we can be badly hurt. But if we've learned from a mistake and became better for it, shouldn't we be rewarded for the learning, rather than punished for the mistake? What if our world worked differently? Suppose we could tell her, I didn't mean what I just said, and she would say, it's okay, I understand. And she would not turn away, and life would really proceed as though we had never said that thing. We could remove the damage, but still be wiser for the experience. Tim and the princess lounge in the castle garden, laughing together, giving names to the colorful birds. Their mistakes are hidden from each other, tucked away by the folds of time. Safe. Already we have a lot to unpack. First of all, we have our player characters named Tim and this princess that he's searching for. This does fall into the aforementioned princess and dragon trope, but rather than a hero simply appearing out of nowhere to rescue the damsel in distress, we have two people in an established relationship and a falling out that resulted from Tim's wrongdoings. It uses this to bring into question the concept of right and wrong, and how wrong is often emphasized over right in society, when the opposite makes much more sense. With that, the first level begins, titled 3 Easy Pieces. It's a fairly basic tutorial level, teaching the player how to jump and climb, and introducing the collectible puzzle pieces and the first enemies, the monstars. If Tim gets hit by one of them, he falls to the bottom of the screen, but then everything stops, and a button prompt appears on the screen. Upon pressing it, we're introduced to the main mechanic of Braid, reversing time. Any mistake can be reversed, allowing Tim to learn and try again, just like the books at the beginning described. After that is the Cloud Bridge, adding doors with keys and the titular clouds into the mix. At the end of the stage is a large picture frame containing the puzzle pieces that have been collected up to this point, with certain puzzle pieces being able to be used as platforms to collect all the pieces in the stage. Also at the end is this lone cloud that appears to not move, but if you look closely, it actually is slowly moving to the left. If you wait for 2 full hours, the cloud will eventually reach the left side of the stage, allowing you to grab one of the stars of Andromeda. The puzzles in this game are certainly something else. Next we have Hunt, which is thankfully much simpler, as all you have to do is defeat 6 monsters to grab a puzzle piece. There is one that you have to skip at first to bounce off later on, but otherwise it's fairly straightforward. The final level of Time and Forgiveness is Leap of Faith, which doesn't add much aside from a lever that moves a platform, and a new enemy called a Claw, although it is a bit more vertical than the previous horizontal levels. The end of the level, however, is somewhat interesting. Tim walks over a bridge and stops at the nautical flag for the letter N, and a plush dinosaur exits the large stone castle saying, "I'm sorry, but the princess is in another castle." With that, World 2 is over, but there's still one more puzzle to solve. By taking all of the puzzle pieces you found in the levels and putting them together, you get this picture. It depicts a boy with a green shirt and a mostly obscured girl with blonde hair in what appears to be the same lush environment from the previous levels. From what I can tell, this is Tim and the princess in the castle garden from the last text in the Cloud Room, when their relationship was still strong and healthy. After that, we move on to the next room, World 3. The room seems to be laid out like a child's bedroom, with toys and a mobile hanging from the ceiling, and the Cloud Room contains the title Time and Mystery, and texts that read, "All those years ago, Tim had left the princess behind. He had kissed her on the neck, picked up his travel bag, and walked out the door. He regrets this to a degree. Now he's journeying to find her again, to show her he knows how sad it was, but also to tell her how good it was." For a long time, he thought they had been cultivating the perfect relationship. He had been fiercely protective, reversing all of his mistakes so they would not touch her. Likewise, keeping a tight rein on her own mistakes, she always pleased him. But to be fully couched within the comfort of a friend is a mode of existence with severe implications. To please you perfectly, she must understand you perfectly. Thus you cannot defy her expectations or escape her reach. Her benevolence has circumscribed you, and your life's achievements will not reach beyond the map she has drawn. Tim needed to be non-manipulable. He needed a hope of transcendence. He needed, sometimes, to be immune to the princess's caring touch. Off in the distance, Tim saw a castle where the flags flutter even when the wind has expired, and the bread in the kitchen is always warm. A little bit of magic. What I gathered from this was that Tim was definitely hiding something from the princess in an attempt to retain autonomy in their relationship, but also left her on his own rather than her simply turning away from him as a result of this dishonesty. Now, the castle mentioned in the last book was what really stood out to me. The dinosaur mentioned that the princess was in another castle at the end of Time of Forgiveness, and the last book of that Cloud Room appeared to be a flashback of the previous relationship between Tim and the princess, so perhaps this was describing when Tim first found her. Starting off with Time and Mystery, we have the Pit, a reoccurring stage layout we see in many of the other worlds. Tim has to jump down into said pit to take a key from a monstar, but can only exit the pit by rewinding. Fortunately, the key and the door it opens are covered in a green glow that makes them resistant to the reversal of time. There and back again is similar, but with Tim traveling up instead of down and rewinding to before the key door is blocked by a metal wall. Phase introduces yet another object that is immune to the flow of time, being the cloud platforms. At first they aren't in the right position to jump across, but holding Tim and the other clouds in position by stopping time can get them in place. The ground beneath her feet is also fairly simple, with switches and platforms that are not affected by rewinding time. Tight channels is where things begin to get tricky. A cannon fires monsters right into the path of a barrage of fireballs, which you need to pull back carefully to let the monster make it down to a platform for you to jump on it. It's here that we meet the Mimics, small rabbits with plants on their backs that chased him around. They get attacked by claws and fireballs as they follow him, but there's another fireball cannon that you need to line up with the first one so that their fireballs collide and destroy each other, allowing Tim to climb up the last part of the stage without getting hit. Irreversible is especially difficult, as there are multiple instances where rewinding time won't fix mistakes, making them truly, irreversible. When combined with the text, it makes me feel like Tim's need to be in control of his relationship with the princess was what caused it to become one-sided and eventually broken beyond repair. Here we have Lair, one of only 2 boss levels in the game. The boss seems to have the same fur as the monsters, but it is much larger with metal armor and a dog-like face. It loses a hit point when Tim drops a chandelier on its head, but it has 5 hit points and there are only 2 chandeliers. However, the boss also glows green, allowing the same chandeliers to be used on it more than once. Again, the resistance to the flow of time shows itself to be a potential problem. A tingling is the culmination of this, as after Tim makes it across the stage, he reaches a platform that causes him to transcend time, letting him rewind the level all the way back to the beginning and grab a puzzle piece that otherwise would have been closed off before he could reach it. Whatever this green glow is, it must have been a desperate measure from Tim that eventually backfired. As Tim reaches the end of the stage, we can see a series of bizarre tree-like buildings in the background. The nautical flag for you is lowered, and another plush dinosaur walks up saying, "Wow, that was very strange. Oh, the princess who? She must be in another castle." Before the puzzle pieces can be put together, placing 2 of them in a very specific position on the frame will make the second star appear, which Tim can reach with some clever usage of the previous picture. Putting the World 3 pieces together presents an image of Tim at some sort of feast, raising a glass. What this means at the moment, I'm not entirely sure, but context will likely come with more of the game. This brings us to World 4, Time and Place. The room doesn't seem to be fully put together, only consisting of cardboard boxes and a small computer desk, with a teddy bear and music box standing out amidst the clutter. The books from the world give us this. Visiting his home for a holiday meal, Tim felt as though he had regressed to those long ago years when he lived under their roof, oppressed by their insistence on upholding strange values which to him were meaningless. Back then, bickering would erupt over drops of gravy spilt onto the tablecloth. Escaping, Tim walked in the cool air toward the university he'd attended after moving out of his parents' home. As he distanced himself from that troubling house, he felt the embarrassment of childhood fading into the past. But now he stepped into all the insecurities he'd felt at the university, all the panic of walking a social tightrope. Tim only felt relieved after the whole visit was over. Sitting back home in the present, steeped in contrast, he saw how he'd improved so much from those old days. This improvement, day by day, takes him ever closer to finding the princess. If she exists, she must. She will transform him and everyone. He felt on this trip that every place stirs up an emotion, and every emotion invokes a memory, a time and location. So couldn't he find the princess now, tonight, just by wandering from place to place and noticing how he feels? A trail of feelings, of awe and inspiration, should lead him to that castle in the future, her arms enclosing him. Her scent fills him with excitement, creates a moment so strong he can remember it in the past. Immediately, Tim walked out his door the next morning toward whatever the new day held. He felt something like optimism. This holiday meal is likely what is depicted in the World 3 picture, and we get the idea that Tim has always stood out from the crowd in some way, shape, or form. But now we've thrown into question what exactly the princess even is, because with the way she's described, she has to be more than just a girl Tim has feelings for. Tim seems to search for the princess by analyzing his memories and the emotions he associates with them, so it's likely that she's not even something tangible, but rather an idea with the power to change the world. Beginning World 4, we're faced with another pit that introduces the new mechanic of this world. When Tim moves to the right, time moves forward. When Tim moves to the left, time moves backward. When Tim stands still, so does time. The fact that Tim's name is only 1 letter away from time certainly isn't a coincidence. Following this, we have Jumpman, a clear homage to the original Donkey Kong arcade game, and perhaps a game Tim played in his childhood. There are 2 structures Tim cannot climb by normal means, and has to manipulate time to conquer them. Just out of reach is a difficult level if you're looking for the puzzle pieces, as you have to get the Monstars into the right positions so that they can grab the keys and be bounced off of. Another hunting level appears, but now the Monstars have to be defeated from left to right, as they will come back to life if Tim moves far enough to the left. With movement by degrees, you first have to maneuver a monster around the claws, and then the claws around a Monstar. Aside from this, there's a depiction of the human life cycle on one of the walls, and a star that can be collected by further messing with the claws. Movement Amplified has a similar Monstar moving puzzle to the previous level, but it throws in these special clouds that cause Tim to move much faster or slower than normal. Fickle Companion is the final level of World 4, forcing Tim to work with a Monstar to get a key into the right places, and even bouncing it off of him in order to reach the 4th star. After this, Tim lowers the nautical flag for L, but before the plush dinosaur can deliver its speech, he simply runs past, off to the next challenge. And finally, placing the World 4 puzzle pieces together gives us a picture of what appears to be Tim hiding underneath his bedsheets in his childhood room as a figure walks in from outside. This is my personal favorite world in the game, not just because of the mechanics and aesthetics, but also what it tells us about Tim. There's snowfall in the background, soothing music box tunes, and of course the references to classic video games, but what really stuck out to me were the large toy blocks scattered across the levels. Most of them have the letters and numbers you'd expect to see on children's wooden blocks, but then there are symbols like the Epitaph of Stevinus and the Aleph 1, which slow down the music as Tim passes them. It's almost like he was trying to understand something he wasn't meant to, perhaps reaching the princess is something that neither he nor the world is ready for. With that, we move on to World 5. The room appears to be a kitchen with a refrigerator, stove, and cupboards. The title of this world is Time and Decision, but there are only 2 books, and they aren't from Tim's perspective. She never understood the impulses that drove him, never quite felt the intensity that, over time, chiseled lines into his face. She never quite felt close enough to him, but he held her as though she were, whispered into her ear words that only a soulmate should receive. Over the remnants of dinner, they both knew the time had come. He would have said, "I have to go find the princess," but he didn't need to. Giving a final kiss, hoisting a travel bag to his shoulder, he walked out the door. Through all the nights that followed, she still loved him as though he stayed, to comfort her and protect her. Princess be damned. So from what I can get from this, Tim was in a relationship with a girl, but she wasn't the princess. Or was she? Because the descriptions of Tim's actions line up fairly well with World 3. First off, we have another pit level with just a single puzzle piece to collect. However, instead of glowing green, it glows purple, and when we rewind, a shadow of Tim jumps down the same way we did and collects the piece. So Distant has us use this new ability to trigger several door switches, while the next level, lacking a name, forces us to sacrifice the shadow in order to grab a key. I suppose it would be difficult to find words to describe watching yourself die. Crossing the gap is a bit tricky since you need to work with Monstars, but there's also a star that can be grabbed by repeatedly bouncing one off Tim's head into a specific area. Window of Opportunity has Tim working side by side with his shadow to flip multiple different switches, and after this there's yet another layer. This time the boss glows purple so it can be harmed by the shadow chandeliers. Fragile Companion is definitely the most difficult since you need to use momentum to avoid losing the green key and having to reset. Up ahead is a wooden castle in ruins with the stained glass pictures of a princess. As Tim lowers the nautical flag for X, another plush dinosaur walks out, completely ditching the typical interaction as if it's not meant to be there. The painting for this world is interesting to me. It depicts what I assume to be Tim in an airport with a travel bag as previously described, but walking right behind him is an identical figure. The same hair, same clothing, same travel bag. I know this has to be something important, but I can't put my finger on what it means just yet. Next, we have World 6, Hesitance. The room appears to be a dining room with cupboards full of dishes, and the texts read, "Perhaps in a perfect world, the ring would be a symbol of happiness. It's a sign of ceaseless devotion. Even if he will never find the princess, he will always be trying. He will still wear the ring. But the thing makes its presence known. It shines out to others like a beacon of warning. It makes people slow to approach, suspicion, distrust. Interactions are torpedoed before Tim can open his mouth. In time, he learns to deal with others carefully. He matches their hesitant pace, tracing a soft path through their defenses. But this exhausts him, and it only works to a limited degree. It doesn't get him what he needs. Tim begins to hide the ring in his pocket, but he can hardly bear it. Too long tucked away, that part of him might suffocate. So whatever this princess is, this ring has to represent a connection to it, and this connection is something that sets Tim apart from other people, and not in a positive way. Starting off, we have another pit level, although we don't have anything to collect here. What we do have is the ring, which creates a radius that slows down time, not unlike those wooden blocks with complex mathematical concepts in time and place. Then we have another repeated level, but rather than rewinding with a green key, we can use the ring to slow down the closing door. This is continued with the next level, using the ring rather than the green glow to get the clouds in place. Cascade is where we start to see some new concepts, such as slowing down Monstars to jump on and holding back cannon fire. Impassable Foliage features some returning puzzles from World 3 and 4, as well as yet another star to collect. Elevator Action, named after a Taito game, is possibly the most difficult level in the game. Not only does it require time-precise use of the ring and the green glow, but there's a star that can only be reached with an extremely precise jump off a mimic, after leading it out of a very tight elevator shaft. Comparatively, In Another Castle is extremely simple, combining the ring with the green glow in a very creative way. Tim walks over to a palace decorated with bizarre statues of empty clothing and a nautical flag for Kay, and a final dinosaur appears, saying, "It took you so long to get here, but at long last I can tell you that the princess must be in another castle. I've never met her. Are you sure she exists?" The picture depicts Tim in a city during the winter, gazing at the ring that lays in a garbage can. It seems like Tim really wanted to rid himself of it, but just couldn't bring himself to. With all the puzzle pieces collected, we can finally climb up to the highest area in Tim's house, which seems to be a study with a desk and film projector. We finally reached World 1, which has no subtitle but 6 books, reading, "At a cafe on a bright plaza, most customers sit back, feeling the warmth of the sun, enjoying their cold drinks. But not Tim. He barely notices the sun, doesn't really taste his coffee. For him, this corner affords a good view of the city, and in the teetering of the passers-by, in the arc of a shopgirl's hand as she displays tea to an interested gentleman, Tim hopes to see clues." That night at the cinema, fictitious adventurers lunge implausibly across the screen. The audience here is mixed. Some are patrons of the cafe, now sitting excitedly in the plush chairs, eager for another new flavor, for distraction from the boredom of their easy lives. Other seats hold fishermen and farm workers, hoping to forget their toils and rest their hands. Tim is here too, but he is scrutinizing the gloss on the lips on the screen, measuring the angle of the plume of a distant helicopter crash. He thinks he discerns a message. When the cinema closes and most of the audience strolls down the plaza to the south, Tim goes north. People like Tim seem to live oppositely from the other residents of the city, tide and riptide flowing against each other. Tim wants, like nothing else, to find the princess, to know her at last. For Tim, this would be momentous, sparking an intense light that embraces the world, a light that reveals the secrets long kept from us, that illuminates, or materializes, a final palace where we can exist in peace. But how would this be perceived by the other residents of the city, in the world that flows contrary-wise? The light would be intense and warm at the beginning, but then flicker down to nothing, taking the castle with it. It would be like burning down the place we've always called home, where we played so innocently as children, destroying all hope of safety forever. It's here that we truly understand how much Tim differs from the people around him, analyzing every minute detail he finds around him in order to somehow decipher where the princess is. Oh god, am I Tim? This world is the strangest one. The music and enemies move in reverse while Tim moves normally, or is it the other way around? There are only a few simple instances of bouncing off of monsters to reach higher platforms before the final level, Braid. Down from a vine climbs a bearded knight, holding none other than the princess Tim has been seeking all this time, although her hair is brunette unlike the stained glass window in pictures with Tim. The princess jumps from the knight's grasp and cries for help as the knight growls just like the boss and jumps up and down, causing the tunnel where Tim is located to begin to collapse as a wall of fire appears behind him. What follows is an intense auto-scrolling challenge where Tim and the princess must pull switches in order to help each other progress and escape the fire that closes in. Soon, they reach the princess's home. Not a castle, but a modern-looking house. Tim is mere inches away from his ultimate goal, but something's not right. He can't quite reach the princess, and he walks and jumps backwards. That's when it hits you. This is the world where everything moves in reverse. And by rewinding time, we see what's really happening. The princess now runs in the opposite direction with Tim in pursuit, attempting desperately again and again to stop him from reaching her, before reaching the beginning of the level and crying for help, as the knight jumps up and down to get her attention. She jumps into his arms and he carries her as he climbs up the vine, out of Tim's reach. But if all of the stars are collected, things can go differently. Tim's switches are now covered with a green glow that makes them immune to the flow of time, allowing Tim to get further ahead than usual. As he jumps on the chandelier and falls back up, the princess begins to flicker and glitch out before an explosion can be heard and the screen flashes white. Everything falls silent, and we can no longer rewind time. What we can do is explore the princess's house. Climbing out of the cellar to the left, we can see a separate building containing the princess's clothing, and a mirror as well as her mailbox with the number 6980. In the main building, we see the Mona Lisa hanging on the wall, a mobile with rabbits and cats, and plushes of the Monstar and dinosaur next to her bed, with the final star floating overhead. Regardless of what happens, we return to the beginning of the level to reach the epilogue. Tim falls into another cloud room, but now there are structures and pieces of terrain skewed about, with a select few texts as well as hidden ones if all the stars are collected. They read as follows. The boy called for the girl to follow him, and he took her hand. He would protect her. They would make their way through this impressive castle, fighting off the creatures made of smoke and doubt, escaping to a life of freedom. The boy wanted to protect the girl. He held her hand, or put his arm around her shoulders in a walking embrace, to help her feel supported and close to him amid the impersonal throngs of Manhattan. They turned and made their way toward the Canal St. subway station, and he picked a path through the jostling crowd. His arm weighed upon her shoulders, felt constrictive around her neck. "You're burdening me with your ridiculous need," she said. Or, she said, "You're going the wrong way and you're pulling me with you." In another time, another place, she said, "Stop yanking on my arm, you're hurting me." He worked his ruler and his compass. He inferred. He deduced. He scrutinized the fall of an apple, the twisting of metal orbs hanging from a thread. He was searching for the princess, and he would not stop until he found her, for he was hungry. He cut rats into pieces to examine their brains, implanted tungsten posts into the skulls of water-starved monkeys. Ghostly, she stood in front of him and looked into his eyes. "I am here," she said. "I am here. I want to touch you," she pleaded. "Look at me." But he would not see her. He only knew how to look at the outsides of things. He scrutinized the fall of an apple, the twisting of metal orbs hanging from a thread. Through these clues he would find the princess, see her face. After a especially fervent night of tinkering, he kneeled behind a bunker in the desert. He held a piece of welder's glass up to his eyes and waited. On that moment hung eternity. Time stood still. Space contracted to a pinpoint. It was as though the earth had opened and the skies split. One felt as though he had been privileged to witness the birth of the world. Someone near him said, "It worked." Someone else said, "Now we are all sons of bitches." She stood tall and majestic. She radiated fury. She shouted, "Who has disturbed me?" But then, anger expelled, she felt the sadness beneath. She let her breaths fall softly, like a sigh, like ashes floating gently on the wind. She couldn't understand why he chose to flirt so closely with the death of the world. The candy store. Everything he wanted was on the opposite side of that pane of glass. The store was decorated in bright colors, and the scents wafting out drove him crazy. He tried to rush for the door, or just get closer to the glass, but he couldn't. She held him back with great strength. Why would she hold him back? How might he break free of her grasp? He considered violence. They had been here before on their daily walks. She didn't mind his screams and his shrieks, or the way he yanked painfully on her braid to make her stop. He was too little to know better. She picked him up and hugged him. "No, baby," she said. He was shaking. She followed his gaze toward the treats sitting on pillows behind the glass, the chocolate bar and the magnetic monopole, the it from bit and the ethical calculus, and so many other things deeper inside. "Maybe when you're older, baby," she whispered, setting him back on his feet and leading him home. "Maybe when you're older." Every day thereafter, as before, she always walked him on a route that passed in front of the candy store. Tim then comes across something especially strange. The graphics for each level assembled into a shape that resembles a castle, with books that read. He tests the stone's weight. He finds he can lift it, and the others too. He can fit them together to create a foundation, an embankment, a castle. To build a castle of appropriate size, he will need a great many stones. But what he's got now feels like an acceptable start. With that, he walks through the door and out onto the bridge, gazing out once again at the flaming city. Continuing still, he can gaze upon the completed Andromeda, the princess in chains. Alright, before we wrap up, I want to start off by making something very clear. I do not think the princess is the atomic bomb. It is the most popular theory relating to the game, and there is some evidence with those references to the Manhattan Project, but I feel like taking those at face value is a bit shallow. I believe that they are important, but to me the princess is something else that possesses a similar level of influence and power, yet is much less tangible. With that out of the way, here is my personal interpretation of Braid's story. Tim was always a peculiar boy. From a young age, he was extremely intelligent, discovering how to decipher very complex mathematical and scientific concepts, which made him stand out among his peers. And yet, that was the one thing he was never able to truly understand. The people around him. Their conflicts, their values, all of it seemed illogical and meaningless to Tim's highly scientific mind. And yet no concept eluded him as much as love. Whether between a parent and a child or a romantic couple, actions and decisions done in the name of love seemed the most inconsistent of all of humanity's little oddities, yet it proved to be immensely powerful. To understand it fully could be as monumental as breaking apart the fabric of the universe, or perhaps reaching that fabled princess at the end of a digital game. Yes, he had to know this mysterious princess, to discover and decipher true love itself. Tim seemed to go through life oppositely to those around him, like Tide and Riptide. While others simply experienced the joys and trials of life, he analyzed everything he saw, looking for clues. Be it a pleasant summer's day or a spectacular motion picture, he looked into every detail, hoping to find something, somewhere, that could lead him to the princess. He looked back at his old memories. He traveled from place to place and took note of how all of it made him feel, for perhaps his emotions could be the key to lead him to his goal. But then, as if out of nowhere, he found her. Her beautiful blonde hair, her stunning eyes, they made him feel something he had never felt before. Something as magical as the princess couldn't be so simple, could it? He led this girl through the place he called home, showing her everything there was to see in the same contrary-wise fashion he had always observed. As they spent time together, he began to ponder over how the princess worked in action. To please him perfectly as she did others would require her to understand him perfectly, and Tim could not afford to forfeit control. So he chose to fortify his innermost feelings in a way that would withstand the test of time. Now, Tim and the girl were very forgiving with each other, but when he locked himself away, how could they connect further? They began to grow distant, and Tim began to lose sight of the princess he had once found. Eventually, he determined that the princess must be elsewhere, and with a final kiss goodbye, he took his travel bag and walked out the door. It wasn't until it was too late that he realized the horrible mistake he had made. By searching for a deeper meaning to the princess, he was unable to appreciate the princess right in front of him, letting her be taken away by his own selfish needs. He wanted more than anything to take back what he had done, but this was something that had caused irreversible damage. Perhaps the princess could be found in another, but others were hesitant to approach somebody like Tim. Now he was all alone in his eternal fortress. But maybe, someday, he could build another castle. One that acknowledges the failures of the original, but takes into consideration the positive memories that helps to foster those happy relationships. Maybe, just maybe, he could find the princess in this other castle. Braid hasn't necessarily had the best reputation. Some people say it's too confusing to understand, others say it's too similar to other games to have its own identity. But to me, Braid is a game that really tried to bring something new to the medium, and I can appreciate it for that. To me, Braid, like so many other things created by people, is art, and no matter what anybody else thinks about it, that won't change.